Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Anita Lucchese, and I serve as Executive Director of Sovereign Bodies Institute. And it's my great honor and joy tonight to open up our discussion. SBI is doing a series of events this month for January as Sex Trafficking and Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So one of the things that I'm most proud of about SBI is that we're guided by the leadership of a Survivors Leadership Council, which is made up of Indigenous people who have each experienced trafficking or survival sex work. And even though all of us come from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, different tribes, and we each have our own experiences of violence and trafficking, we come together with a shared mission to raise awareness, uplift survivors, and create paths forward to healing and violence prevention. So I'm joined tonight by 3 members of the Survivors Leadership Council, and I'm going to turn it over to them for them to introduce themselves. Alea, would you like to go first?
Sure. Anine, hello everyone. First but foremost, I think I would like to acknowledge my spirit name, she who collects the medicine for the people and she who works from the heart for the people. I come from the Lynx clan. I originate from a northern community, 186 kilometers northwest on Lake Manitoba shoreline, so I'm from Canada. I come from a community called Sunny Bay Ojibwe First Nation, but reside in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Thank you. Carrie, would you like to go next?
I would. My name is Carrie Herthel, and I am from California. I'm a survivor leader, and my tribal affiliation is Ohlone Indian. So I'm Esalen, Rumson, and my territory is Monterey County, California. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. Jessica?
Bonjour, Gidiga Kunst Indigenous. My name is Jessica. I am a Two-Spirit member of the Boys Fort Band of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, and I am a member of the Sovereign Bodies Survivor Leadership Council, and then also a research assistant for Sovereign Bodies. And I am a student at the University of Wisconsin-Superior.
Thank you. And just to follow up and introduce myself personally, as I mentioned, I serve as Executive Director of SBI. I am also a member of the Survivors Leadership Council as a survivor of trafficking myself. And I currently reside on Tohono O'odham territory in Tucson, Arizona, where I'm pursuing a PhD in geography. So now that we've all had a chance to introduce ourselves, I just want to start by talking a little bit about what this discussion is going to be about tonight. So as a group, when we started brainstorming what topics were important to us to discuss this month for Trafficking Awareness Month, we kind of returned to a conversation that we as a group have had several times about the importance of survivor leadership in the movement, and the importance of not just making room for survivors in the movement in leadership positions, but also really following their lead and supporting them to be leaders and building survivors up. So it's not just enough to give somebody an opportunity. It also takes a lot of active work to really support survivors, whether it's supporting their ideas and their drive and their initiative, or creating platforms for their voices, or even supporting them in doing the work in a healthy way. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight. And I want to start by turning it over to Alea, because the title of this webinar, Walking Alongside Survivors and Uplifting Survivors, is something that Alea mentioned in that group discussion. And I thought it was just such a beautiful way to describe what we were talking about. So I want to invite Alea to share how she came up with that idea and how she's seen it or experienced it in her own work as a movement organizer for several years, and what some of her personal experiences are or advice that she might share for those who are wanting to know what it means to walk alongside and uplift survivors in this work. So Alea, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Miigwech for listening in tonight. First and foremost, I think I need to go back and acknowledge Tricia Owens, who is a young Indigenous woman here in Manitoba, who gave me the platform under the umbrella of her name here in the province of Manitoba to pursue in the work that we do collectively, whether it's in Canada or US in Canada. I just like to take that moment to acknowledge her. She was a young girl who was put in the care of Child and Family Services here in province of Manitoba and fell through the cracks of the system. But with her falling through the cracks of the system and her losing her life to suicide, it wouldn't be for her. It wouldn't be for her death to give me voice and give me that platform to share my knowledge and expertise and my leadership with all of you and with those whom I've shared consistently with throughout the years. So I just like to acknowledge her, Tricia Owens. But prior before that, I just want to back up to about 2007, 8, 9, back when in the province of Manitoba here, there wasn't no survivors at tables making decisions for other survivors or those whom were actively entrenched in exploitation and or human trafficking. And I seen the need there, that there needed to be more of our voices at those tables, and it was very hard at that time in those years. But I was determined to pull a chair up at the meetings that were held for us, not by us, but for us. And I was determined to sit there, although I felt really small sitting with a lot of executive directors at that time. There was about 50 executive directors sitting at a meeting called the Sexually Exploited Youth Community Coalition, which is hosted here in the province of Manitoba, combating exploitation, human trafficking of youth, women, boys, girls, GLBTQ2S folk. So that's kind of where I started my journey, was by pulling up that chair. And not only pulling up that chair, but at times I wanted to feel like I wanted to actually run out of the rooms during those meetings, because I felt small. I felt small because I didn't have no doctor, PhD, or anything by my name, like social work degree, nothing like that. But I was determined to sit there, although I felt very small, to express and to be the voice of those whom have been victimized through exploitation and sex trafficking. So during the duration of those years, I've had a amount of Indigenous women who stood by me and helped lift me up. Some of those women were Kathleen Shellrood, Diane Red Sky, Rebecca Cook, Leslie Spillett, Honey Fontaine. There's a long list of them that just continuously walked alongside me and continuously helped me along my journey and helping me pursue and being a voice, not only for myself, but for the community here as a collective, and drawing awareness and attention to exploitation, human trafficking. So again, it wouldn't be for those voices in that young Indigenous woman that lost her life to suicide, giving me the opportunity to grow. Overall, a lot of community partners have walked alongside me in my ups and my downs. And one of the things we need to understand as survivors, and those survivors that are that you're working with collectively within your organizations, is that there's going to be a lot of times that we're down, but there's going to be more times that we are up. And those are the best times to walk alongside us and to not walk in front of us, not walk behind us, but to walk alongside us and guide us in a way that we don't know, that we weren't taught during the duration of our time as being victimized to exploitation, human trafficking. So out of all of that, out of all those meetings, sitting there feeling very little, I started to grow, and I started to grow drastically. And I didn't see my potential at that time. and the women, our Indigenous sisters, seen my potential and continuously walked alongside me and walked through my growth of being that young person sitting, pulling up a chair, to actually speaking to crowds of up to 350, 400 people, and then traveling with them, traveling around the province with them on education formats and presentations addressing exploitation, human trafficking. Therefore, at that time, the conversation wasn't too talked about. It wasn't talked about so openly as it is today. There wasn't any support systems in play. So I always look back at those moments and from those moments to today and see the growth, the expansion of the opportunities that were given to me, not only given to me, but that were nurtured with me, with community. And again, I always need to acknowledge the community partners, again, helping me. There's times when I, just didn't have enough money to buy food, for example, or there's a lot of times also too that they helped me in my journey of employment, because at that time I didn't have any history of employment, and to give me those opportunities of growth really helped me pursue in a healthy way of life, and not only a healthy way of life, but a healthy way of understanding on how to build those relationships and those bridges with partners, partners that are still walking alongside me today. I think that's one of the important pieces, and how it all just came to me, and like sitting in the meeting with other survivors on the line, just listening. I like to hear people talk, and I envision, and when I envision, I start putting those pieces together, and that's just how this whole conversation of survivor leadership came about. Again, going back to where I was to today, back where I was at that time in 2007, 2008, I was somewhat on the street, to today where I'm working alongside member of legislative, where I'm an assistant to an MLA here in the province of Manitoba. So those growth spans are huge, drastically huge, and where I'm learning consistently. And I always tell my employer of how I mirror her, because we don't see a lot of that in Indigenous people, that we don't see ourselves reflected in people with power, right? So I always remind my employer of how she helps me grow personally, and how I am so honored to be working alongside her, because she shows me something new every day that I'm employed with her. And I've had a lot of opportunities of employment through the duration of walking alongside our amazing partners, our amazing Indigenous women here in the province of Manitoba, and including our sisters here online, walking alongside with them, watching their growth, watching something become a seed to something sprouting. Prior before that also too, I was in the child welfare field, which really drained me. And I think one of the best decisions that I've made personally was to move from that department to where I'm at today in government, where I actually love what I'm doing. I actually love the work that I do with my MLA, and the work that we do collectively for our peoples in our province. So I think that might be my 15 minutes. So I'm going to pass it along. I don't want to hold up too much time. And I just like to thank all of you for tuning in tonight, because you're going to learn a lot from us moving forward. Miigwech.
Thank you so much, Alea. That was beautiful. And as I was listening to you give thanks for all of the really amazing Indigenous women that have supported you in your journey, I started thinking of the same, like, who would be on my list if I was going to say thank you? I think that's a really beautiful prompt, and definitely something that I want to think about more, and maybe reach out to those people and actually say thank you for that. For me, especially what came to mind was SBI's board. Our board members, we have 4 currently, Claudette White, Sarah Deer, Theda Newbreast, and Desi Rodriguez Lombear. They've been board members since day one of our organization. And when I reached out to them and told them, hey, this is what I'm thinking of doing and what I want to build. And I want you to be a part of it and keep me accountable and keep me on track to make sure it's something really good. None of them hesitated. And every single one of them believed in the idea and in me. And that was, as a survivor, one of the most empowering experiences of my life. And it brought all of us together who are on the call tonight. So I do want to give a shout out to the ladies on our board because they've been incredible role models in this way. My next question is for Carrie. I know that Carrie has talked about the importance of being a survivor leader, and Carrie's a very experienced survivor leader. She's worked in the movement to end trafficking for decades. Carrie, I know that you've spoken before about, survivor leadership is amazing, but it's only amazing if survivors are taken care of through that process. And Alea, I think that's something you spoke to as well, that sometimes there's very basic human needs that survivors need help having met in order to be the kind of leader that they can be. And so, Carrie, I want to invite you to share a bit on your thoughts on what it means to support survivors working in a healthy way, and what maybe some survivor self-care might look like in becoming leaders and doing this work.
Thank you for inviting me to speak. I'd like to speak and then go into a little bit of the self-care that I've learned. One, I'd like to introduce myself as well as 29 years I'm celebrating of sobriety and recovery. So it has been an incredible journey. And what I've learned along the way of my recovery in sobriety was, one, for a very long time in recovery, I did not understand my history fully. It was 10 years ago that I was at my first training. I was getting involved in the work of a nonprofit called Shared Hope. And I was becoming an ambassador to work in the movement. That said, at that training, it was very interesting when the police put up the new law. At that time, it was like a wake up, like, oh my God, all of a sudden my history flashed before me, and I understood something in recovery that I had never understood before. And that was that I was trafficked. My history included sex trafficking. And that was a big release for me personally, understanding. I was able to understand and have a kindness for myself that I had never, always in recovery. And I had worked at treatment centers and, really participated in the field of recovery. But that moment changed everything because I understood my trauma and my shame at a very, very deep level. And so one of the things that I began to understand, that walking with survivors, how that impacted me, newly coming into the movement, and how I could work with my survivor sisters, was much like recovery, in that I got to put on a new form of listening with my survivor sisters. And that listening, that kindness that survivors had, was a form of love that I have never had never experienced until that moment of walking with my survivor sisters. And so listening is a very powerful form of how we can walk with each other. The other thing is that validation that we're not alone, that understanding our compassion and our shared journey is a big part of my recovery. Being with the community of survivors, where I can learn with that validation, with that encouragement, with that truth, is a powerful healing for me. In this way, even talking with you and knowing that what I need to do here to walk with survivors is that I need to model the truth and being authentic. You know, it used to really get in my way in some of the nonprofits that my experience has provided with me. I tried way too hard. I really tried to colonize myself in a lot of ways and be educated, be more authoritarian, be more professional, be more, it was always be more. And, you know, that comes from my wounding. And I can tell you that walking with the survivors at Sovereign Bodies Institute now is changing me in big ways. You know, I'm the elder here, but it's kind of funny because I feel like the baby, because these women are very, very powerful women. And so they modeled to me what was taken away from me early on in my youth. And I'm so proud of each of these sisters that I walk with that can model to me their courage and their unique way of bringing in now the future in the movement. And that is incredible. So in the question, asking what we can do to help other survivors and walk with them is really in this way of helping us to regain our sense of personal power and agency. And you know, that's really what I just said, isn't it? That was taken away from me. My truth of who I was early on. You know, my mother, my biological mother, and my father, my mother was a prostitute and my father was a pimp. And so I was sold as a child. And so there's a lot of intergenerational trauma in my story, and really a real lack of sense of who I am is very much a part of my woundedness. And so that intersects with being a survivor of sex trafficking, my own story, my own vulnerability, you know, that really comes forth. And those effects are with me on a daily basis. I can see them in my behavior. I don't think that it's something I'm ever going to be able to fix or to become something different, but I can sit here as an elder and I can be truthful. I can demonstrate what it's like to talk about the seriousness of the effects and the trauma and the hope for the future. So knowing where to point someone that is new is such a powerful offering to sit and offer someone that could be in crisis, could be, you know, this mixed up drugs, alcohol, all the addictions that are impacting their ability to manage where they're coming from this trauma, from this story. And so bringing our open heart and reminding them of their value and being with them with an open heart is a real gift that survivors carry. And I know that people that are here listening to us as well have this capacity to open their hearts and listen to us, and to take that out in the world and reach out and give it to others. I think that as survivors, we're able to communicate our truths in such a powerful way to affect the course of someone's life. And we need support in order to do that. And that is where the self-care comes in. You know, I'm a massage therapist, I'm a cultural officer for my tribe. And I can tell you that the importance of taking care of ourselves, our self-care, because as survivors and wanting to make a difference, we have to learn to manage and care for ourselves in ways that are very different than we've known in our past. And so that learning about self-regulation, learning about grounding, learning about my body and how it works, learning about trauma, educating myself, and having a good cry with my sisters has been a significant part of my journey. And you know, I as a cultural officer, I find myself in my village in Monterey County. I live in a village of my ancestors. That was a village for women. And it was a village for women because in California's history, in the missionization and the trafficking, the women went to an area, which was this village, to hide and to keep the children safe from being taken to the mission. And so I have, as a cultural officer, I represent that history. I represent the history in my territory of my ancestors who were suffering the effects of colonization and sex trafficking. And so I go up to our birthing rock where the women gathered with the children to pray. And I am able to go up there now as a survivor. I carry and I understand the experience of being a survivor, but I also understand the experience of our history as Indigenous women. And so I'm quite honored to be able to now, as an elder, go up there and hold my recovery and hold my sisters in prayer. And I'm so grateful that I've been given that awareness, that opportunity to understand how to take poison and make it into medicine. Because you see, these women, these sisters, that's exactly what their resilience has done. That's exactly what our history has done as Indigenous women and leaders and men and warriors and on, that we have the resilience to take such poison and turn it into medicine. This is the path of self-care, to do that, to ground in that, to ground in ceremony, to ground in these practices and walk together on these trails that we're walking on, the journey of healing. I have so much more to say, and I believe that I'll have an opportunity to do that at the end of this month. And I'm hoping that you will be able to join me and support me and to hear me and to validate my work, because this is how you can support the healing, by showing up and by giving your heart and validating my experience as a survivor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carrie. That was so, so beautiful. I started tearing up when you were talking about turning poison into medicine. I feel like I need to like put that in a frame or something. It's so beautiful and it's so true. And I think it really speaks to the resiliency of survivors and of us as Indigenous peoples. And I really am thankful and grateful for the story and the teachings that you've shared with us about your own people's history and places of significance. Because I think every Indigenous people has a history of that kind of violence, unfortunately. And there are very few Indigenous people alive today, if any, that don't have an ancestor that experienced some kind of sexual violence, right? It's something that was an inherent part of colonization. And I think we talk about sexual assault a bit in our communities, not as much as we should. But the trafficking element is something that gets left out, and it's very difficult for people, I think, to be able to acknowledge, yes, that's something my ancestor experienced and it affected my family and it's part of my inheritance. And I have, an opportunity to change it into something powerful. And that's what you've done. And that's what you're role modeling for all of us. So thank you so much, Carrie. My next question is for Jessica. So we have some really amazing, badass women on this call, and you've heard from Alea and her experiences working in services provision, advocacy, and now policymaking. And you've heard from Carrie and her work as a movement leader and as a cultural leader for her tribe, and as an elder. And now I want Jessica to have an opportunity to share about the importance of survivor leadership in academia. Jessica is a rising star in academia and has already published incredibly powerful, insightful research on survivor leadership, and I believe has a really promising career doing so for years to come. So I want to invite Jessica to share on what it means for research to be led by survivors and why that's so important.
Thank you, Anita. Okay, so I'm gonna start off kind of just a little bit about how I came into research as a survivor, and kind of my journey to where I'm at now in academia. When I first applied for UW, as I go to school at the University of Wisconsin-Superior, I had already had my AA and AS from Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, but that was 10 years prior, and I had a very low GPA. So I didn't even know if I was going to be able to get in or not. So my admissions essay, I kind of disclosed a lot about my background with domestic violence and sexual assault, and then, kind of all the multi-generational trauma that I grew up with. And then I put that in my essay, and I just said, I had a really rough 10 years. I had a really rough time when I was in Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College. I kind of just laid it out there, and I got accepted. So that was kind of a turning point to begin with for me at the first healing starting point of my healing journey in academia. And right before I started school, my mom had a really bad brain injury. She fell and cracked her head open and had to have emergency brain surgery. And she was in the hospital for a little over a month, and I was in the hospital with her. And my school semester started right when she got out of the hospital. So I, at the time, was living in Superior, right down from where the campus is, and I had to move to Carlton to care for my mother. So within that first semester back to school in 10 years, I really did not have any confidence starting out. I was really scared. I had a lot of anxiety because of the trauma that I was still going through with my mom, not knowing whether or not my mother was going to be able to even remember my name. She had such bad memory because of that accident that it was really a huge stressor for me starting back to school. But very quickly into the semester, I had started making connections with my teachers. You know, I was very, very open and honest with my instructors and telling them, you know, what was going on. I was really struggling with trying to find a balance in classes. I ended up having to switch my minor, and then I had to take an independent study so that I was able to stay home a little bit more with my mom and then still be able to focus on school. That independent study is what brought me into research and into the missing and murdered Indigenous people movement, because I met with my advisor for that independent study, Kat Wachowski, and she's my mentor and my friend. And, you know, we sat down and she just kind of asked me, think of a topic that relates to your minor and your major and something that's important to you. And I did not even really hesitate about it. I knew what I wanted to start researching. And I started researching missing and murdered Indigenous women. And very, very right at the beginning of my research, I found Anita's research and I found Sovereign Bodies Institute, and a lot of what Anita's work with sovereign bodies, a lot to do with that first independence study. So throughout that whole process, I did tell Kat Wachowski, you know, that I had a background in domestic violence and sexual assault. But at the time I didn't really even understand fully that I was a survivor of human trafficking myself. And Kat Wachowski, my mentor, was the first person that I disclosed that to. And it wasn't until after we had already finished my independent study, was right at the end of it where I finally, you know, felt comfortable enough and wanted me to open up to her about that. And from that moment on, it empowered me to live and to walk in my truth. And shortly after that, last year at the press conference for Trafficking Awareness Month in Duluth here, I came out in front of press, 100 people in the room, and told my survivor story. And ever since then, you know, I have been so supported by everybody in my life. You know, Kat Wachowski has been one of my biggest supporters on this journey in academia. Allie Willingham, my mentor for my research over the summer, has been incredible. Nate Lecoussier, who has been my instructor for most of my classes. He's the instructor for the legal studies at UWS. And he's one instructor that at the very beginning that I was really open with him in our little introduction things where we tell, you know, a little bit about ourselves. I spilled it all, you know, I was open about all of my besides the trafficking at that time. And the support and the empathy and the just empowerment that those instructors gave me, and no judgment, just nothing but just support and complete understanding, it made such a huge difference just within that first month when I was trying to navigate all of this with my mom. And then after the independent study, I reached out to Anita, and I just told her I'm a survivor too, and I just wanted to thank her for her work and how powerful her work is and her story. And then, she invited me to be on the Survivor Leadership Council. And the Survivor Leadership Council, without it, I wouldn't be where I'm at right now. Just the connections and the relationships and the love and support that I've gotten from each and every one of the sisters on the council has been a complete lifesaver in more ways than one, in ways that I cannot put into words. So to walk with survivors in academia, like I think about when I tell my instructors, that I have these traumas, and they're very understanding and very helpful. But then, at the end of my independent study, Kat Wachowski mentioned, she said, think about doing the McNair Scholar Program. And so I applied for that, and I had the, excuse me, I had to take a drink. I had to do an interview for that. And I was very honest and open within the interview. And, I told them what I wanted to research and kind of my background with trauma. And I just remember the program assistant, Deb, she started crying after the interview and just gave me a hug. And even just that little, that hug from her, she didn't even know me. It really meant a lot to me, and it put something, in my heart that, people at my school do really care. And I got accepted into the program, and at first I tried to change my mind. I was like, no, I think I'm going to do something else. But then Monty Stewart, my advisor for that, talked me into it, and I'm very grateful that he did, because that program was incredible. They worked with us diligently every week and allowed us to research what we wanted to do. And mine was, the title of my research that I had published was A Survivor's View on Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, Raising Survivor and Grassroots Warrior Voices. So what I did with that was I surveyed like 30 Indigenous people from across the country and in Canada. And I found the needs of survivors within the survey. And then I interviewed 12 people, some of the women from the Leadership Council, and then some from different aspects of work. And I, found the needs, and then I turned around and met those needs, and I introduced these people that are out here doing this amazing work. I'm working with survivors and families of missing and murdered Indigenous people. And just from after that, like things kind of started taking off. I was asked to do a lot of different webinars and trainings and things like that. But, even within that research process, I did have a little bias incident with one of my editors, and when she was editing my stuff, a lot of it, she just completely blacked out. And one part was like a part of my story where my friend's mother was murdered when we were younger. And I was talking about how we sat in the community center, and we're trying to figure out, looking up stuff about her mother's murder. And the editor had completely blacked that out and said, focus on this. So for me, like, I almost like wanted to quit at that point, because this is a research report titled A Survivor's View on Missing and Murdered Indigenous People, and the editor was trying to take my voice out of it, which was, it was hurtful and it was frustrating. But I turned back around and I talked to my mentors about it, and they calmed me down, and I just reworded it a little bit and put it back into where it needed to be, because that's my research, and I wasn't about to let somebody take my voice out of it, because for so long it took me a long time to find my voice. So I'm not gonna allow anybody, no matter what type of report or anything in academia, I'm not gonna allow anybody to silence me in any way. But that's really the only thing that hasn't been supportive in academia for me. And I think like the importance of having survivor-led research, like when I look back at my independent study and some of the things, even within the literature review for my published report that I did over the summer, a lot of it was not survivor-led. Some of it wasn't even, done by Indigenous people. So often we have our stories and our traumas and, our problems and things that we go through, told by other people, told by people who haven't been in our shoes, who don't know how it feels. And survivors have that expertise on these issues that is really crucial, especially in academia and anything, even books and things like that. Anything that's written and researched by a survivor, it's more credible than anything else, because we've been there, we've gone through that, we know how it feels, and we know how to survive it. So there's really nobody better to tell these stories than ourselves. So for me to be able to, come to terms and to accept the fact that, I was trafficked, and it did hold me down for almost 10 years. And it took me to get back into school and figure out what I want to do with my life. I think, a huge part too with academia is the people not only in the school that support you, but outside of the school, my family, my friends, all of the sisters. I have met so many sisters across the country. It would take me an hour to name them all, but they all are doing their own thing, and they're all doing grassroots work, and they're all doing phenomenal things in their community, and we all uplift each other. So for that is really important for me to have on my journey as well. And then, like I have people that support me at UWS as well. Sam Aday from the TRIO Student Support Services is a big supporter of me and my work. He's constantly, uplifting my voice. The Native Nation Student Organization that I'm a part of, and Erica Backstrom, one of my teachers, she was my mediation teacher, phenomenal support. Heather Rickrell, she works in the career services, phenomenal support for me. T. Leeper and Julie O'Leary. I'm trying to think. I would like to acknowledge everybody, but those are some, the big ones for me. And then even outside of academia, like if you're walking alongside survivors, like Mel Alvar is somebody who has been supportive from day one, since the day I met her. She works for PAVSBA, and she was actually somebody that I interviewed for my research report. But she was there when I came out as a survivor in front of everybody at the press conference. And Lenny Hayes, I cannot forget about Lenny Hayes, because Lenny has been a lifesaver in so many ways. We are both two-spirit, you know, and we've connected on that, and then we've done work together. He's always asking me to do work with anything that he's kind of involved with, because, you know, as a two-spirit woman, it's good to have perspectives, you know, from two-spirit woman and a two-spirit man. So Lenny has been a really, really, really strong support for me. And then, you know, just little things too, like not little things, I don't know why I said little things. Financial support, you know, students need financial support. So this year, after I applied for some foundation scholarships, I have my entire school year funded by scholarships. So my tribal scholarship, and then I got 2 UW Foundation scholarships, you know, Pope Wright Memorial Scholarship, and then the Tony Gigliotti Memorial Scholarship. And even for my art that I do for families of missing and murdered Indigenous people, this year I'm getting funded by the arts board here in Minnesota, and all my relations arts. So there's so many different aspects of like how I look at how you can support survivors. But, you know, for me in academia, it's a lot of that is just that moral support, you know, like your voice is valued, you know, I appreciate your work. Your work is, you know, being seen and being heard. Let me raise your voice some more. So SBI has hands down been the #1 support for me. Even over the summer when I was doing my research, you know, I asked Anita, hey, what do you think about taking on an intern? And she didn't even hesitate. She's like, yeah, absolutely. So I did my internship simultaneously while I was doing my research over the summer. And from that, then after that, hired me as a research assistant. And I think, you know, for that, just for that to happen for me too, like after my first year of being back to school in 10 years, like I'm already doing this really amazing work and a part of all of these really amazing things. It has done things for my inner healing that would have never been possible had I not reached out to Anita, or had I not told Kat Rachowski that I was a survivor of human trafficking. So I think what I'm getting at is, like, you know, find your voice and use it, because for so long our people have been silenced, and especially in academia, you know, it's such a colonized space, and we kind of have to force our way into these spaces. And so when you find your voice and find your purpose, and for me, you know, it's doing this research, and it's working with all of these amazing people, and it's working on these initiatives that will stop human trafficking. Because for me, if I can, you know, help or save one person, then I've done, you know, my work is done good and well, and I feel good with myself because I helped one person, even if it's just one. I think that's really all I wanted to say. I don't know. I'm nervous. All these things are nerve-wracking, and especially, and that's another thing. Like, I just wanted to say really quick too. Like, when you're working with survivors, you know, these are very traumatic things that we're talking about, and especially this whole month of Human Trafficking Awareness Month, it's heavy. It's really heavy stuff, and it's talking about things that we've gone through, and that things that we're still processing our healing on, but we're speaking out against, so that we can help change this and help stop this and bring awareness to it, so that our people don't end up in these situations anymore. I think I thanked everybody. Oh, no, I missed some people I need to thank. MN350 recently has been really supportive of me, Misty Babineau, Tasha Martineau, and then Marcia Kiddo has always been really supportive of me as well, I think. Alea, you went off on the thank you tangent, so while Carrie was talking, I was writing down names, scrambling, trying to figure out who I wanted to thank.
It's all good.
I love it. We're all practicing our Oscars speech.
Right?
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for sharing your journey and your story with us. I think your journey is just inspiring. And you're a brilliant scholar and a brilliant mind, and I can't wait to see what you do. And definitely a lot of what you shared was very relatable for me too. I'm in school as well and have experienced both, ups and downs, good and bad. Mostly good, I think, but definitely experienced weird stuff like, little microaggressions. Like I had a peer, a fellow grad student tell me that I was too ghetto for grad school because I talked about some of my personal experiences in my research. Or when it came time to defend my master's thesis, I was afraid to go there in person because it was the city where my trafficker lived. And I told the university that they made me go anyways and be there in person, even though it felt very unsafe. So there's definitely, still a lot of work to be done, but there's also a lot of great stuff happening as seen through Jessica's experiences and, even my own as a PhD student. I feel so fortunate to have the supervisors that I do, and they've been so supportive of me trying to navigate working full-time for SBI and continuing to do all of the work that SBI does while also doing a full-time PhD, which sounds crazy because it is. I don't recommend it. Don't do it. Pick one. But it was something I didn't feel like I could choose. And there was no way I was going to walk away from SBI and the work that we do. And so they've always supported me in helping to find ways to balance both. And I'm really appreciative for that. Before we move into the Q&A, I just wanted to share a couple of the things that kind of came to my mind as I was listening to my sister's share tonight. And I think the big thing that I wanted to share is just the importance of really understanding that survivor leadership is a daily practice and commitment, no matter what career field you're in, whether you're in movement organizing around trafficking or violence against Indigenous people or not. I think all of the ladies on this webinar have shared that they work in the movement, but they also work outside it. Jessica has been doing really great work opposing Line 3. Carrie has done phenomenal work in cultural restoration and protection. Alea has worked on all sorts of topics as somebody in provincial policy making. So all of us are multifaceted, diverse, dynamic human beings who do all sorts of things. And the reality of work in Indian country is no matter what room you're in, there's at least one survivor in that room. There is never a time when there isn't a survivor in the room. And it shouldn't be that way. Hopefully a generation or two from now, it won't be that way. But with the realities of the high rates of violence in our communities, there is no room where you don't have a survivor. And that realization came to me, not in my work in the movement, but in my work in academia, because I was teaching. I've worked in a couple different tribal education programs and institutions. And I had to think about, as a teacher, what does it mean to have a classroom of 25 Native students, knowing that maybe 15 of them are survivors? How does that change my curriculum? How does that change how I interact with them, and the kind of homework I assign to them, or the kinds of lesson plans that I design? So it's not just movement work, it's every little thing that we do. And sometimes it's, I I like what Jessica said when she said, well, it's little things. Oh, wait, they're not little. Which is, the point, that something that maybe feels little to somebody who isn't a survivor is actually a really big deal to someone who is, and can make a world of difference. Like Jessica shared with that hug that was so encouraging for her. So it can be moments like that, or even just understanding that there's some jokes that you shouldn't say because they're not funny to a survivor, or maybe don't assume that somebody wants to give you a hug, and ask first, because maybe somebody is a survivor and needs to have their the boundaries around their body protected. There's day-to-day small things that really aren't that small. And I think a big thing for us too, again, whether you're in the movement or not, is in our communities, both in Indigenous communities, and I've seen it in non-Indigenous communities as well. There's a lot of stigma and a lot of prejudice around being a trafficking survivor, or being a survivor of survival sex work, and that stigma shouldn't be there. As you've seen through the women that have shared on this call, people who've experienced trafficking or survival sex work are brilliant and brave and powerful and resilient and healers and scholars and all of these amazing things. But we don't get to be that way when people don't see us as human beings. So for my own story as a survivor, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it tonight, but there's one memory that I have that I just wanted to share kind of in closing before we go to Q&A, which is that there were multiple times when I was being trafficked where my abuser would be hitting me on the side of the road in broad daylight, cars driving past. There were multiple times where I was, on the side of the road with him, because he also had all sorts of trauma and mental health issues, and his own experiences of violence and abuse. And he would have trauma-induced seizures. And I'd be standing on the side of the road trying to flag cars down for help, hoping that he wasn't getting brain damage. And no one stopped. No one ever stopped, and no one ever called for an ambulance or for law enforcement. And that experience made me feel like I was, as tiny as like a little flea, that I just meant nothing, that I wasn't worth stopping for. I wasn't worth making a phone call for. And that I could be standing on the side of the road screaming for help and nobody would listen. I don't ever wish that experience on anyone in this world, because it made me feel so small that it made all of the abuse and the violence that I was going through feel like I deserved it. Feel like there was nothing else better for me because I didn't matter to anyone. 5 years after that experience, I was a PhD student with a full scholarship and an international nonprofit that I was in charge of, that I started. So I was never a worthless person by the side of the road that didn't mean anything or didn't have potential or didn't have things to contribute or a beautiful mind, because I always had all of that. It's just when I was the girl by the side of the road, people thought that's all I was ever going to be, or that that's all I was. I'm still that girl. I haven't, I've changed, I've grown, I've healed, but I'm still me. I'm still just as smart today as I was 5 years ago. And so what I want to share is that even if it's as simple as seeing somebody on the side of the road and not judging them and offering some help. Or if you see relatives or people in your community that are maybe struggling with life on the streets or substance use or an abusive relationship, just don't go into that judgment zone. Instead, come at it from a place of love and compassion. I think a lot of the values that my sisters on this webinar have shared tonight are things that are traditional to, you know, to all of our cultures in different ways. There's still a lot that I have to learn about all of that, but what I feel like I can speak to is survivor leadership is traditional, in the sense that we've always cared for the people in our community who are hurting. We've always taken the time to listen to them and talk to them and see what they need to feel better. We've always uplifted the people who had the gifts and the calling to do specific work in our communities or to take on specific kinds of leadership or service to the community. Those are values that are intrinsic to who we are. So putting those in practice to uplift survivors is part of who we are. We don't get to say that we are who we were born to be until we start doing that kind of work. So that's what I wanted to close with. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jessica now so that she can moderate some of the questions and comments we've received on Facebook.
Nobody's really asked any questions. I'm trying to look. Just a lot of empowering comments.
That's awesome.
Can we maybe give a schedule of our upcoming webinars for our audience this evening?
Yes, that sounds great. Thank you, Carrie. So we have 2 more webinars coming up this month, and then a few more live storytelling from survivors with Q&A. So the next 2 webinars that we have, they're always on Fridays. So there'll be one next week and the one after that. The webinars will be on designing or reimagining services for Indigenous survivors of trafficking. And that panel will feature Indigenous women who are leading service provision programs for Indigenous survivors of trafficking, as well as a relative of an Indigenous woman who was murdered due to her experience of trafficking, so that the family perspective can be shared as well. And then our second or our last panel will be focused on the intersections of the foster care system and the child welfare system with the issue of trafficking and sexual exploitation. So again, those will be on Fridays. And then we also have been doing some live storytelling from survivors with Q&A. So Jessica has already done hers. That video is available on our Facebook page and our website. All of our webinars. So this one will be posted on our website as well. But really those sessions are an opportunity to hear from a survivor firsthand, more about their experience and their story of trafficking and sexual exploitation, the pieces of it that they feel comfortable to share, as well as an opportunity for you as community members to ask questions, whether it's questions about the dynamics of what they experience or questions about how you can support people who have been through something that is similar to what they've been through. We really wanted to give an opportunity to have that kind of dialogue with some of the women on the Survivors Leadership Council. So those are upcoming live events. We've also released last week a awareness poster series. So those are available on our social media now, and they'll be available free for download on our website. at poster size dimensions for those who want to actually print hard copy posters. And that's from our Survivors Are series. So kind of similar to what I was sharing earlier in this webinar, was just that we wanted to kind of reclaim what it means to be a survivor. And instead of, being made to, oftentimes survivors are made to feel less than or damaged or dirty. And so instead, what we wanted to say was survivors are powerful and healers and resilient and bold and smart and powerful. I'm saying it twice because we are. Those posters are available on our social media now. Please make sure to check them out and to share them. And we'll also be sharing other resources throughout the month. I do want to make sure we also mention on this call, Sovereign Bodies Institute has a 24-hour support line. So if there's any survivors or families who are listening or tuning in tonight, and you feel like you need to talk to somebody, or there's services that you think could be helpful to you, please reach out to us. You can call or text that phone number. We'll post it on our Facebook page this evening so that you'll be able to find it easily. It's confidential. Everything is, of course, completely free. We can try to connect you with the support that you need to get on your own healing path. Please do reach out if you're able to, or if you need it. Is there anything else you ladies would like to add? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, I have something that I want to add too, just at the end of the month, because I'm involved with the MN 350 work here on the line 3, and then also uplifting the recent report that came out from the Minnesota Trafficking Task Force. We are doing an event at the end of the month too, and I had to share that publicly on my page. And I just want to say, even with that work, and Anita said, I personally can't take really much credit for the line 3 opposition, just because I don't have my body on the line like the frontline warriors do. But I really just want to take a minute to uplift those frontline warriors right now, because they're out there, they're putting their body on the line and they're getting arrested. I've even just today, one of the warriors here in my city, where Camp McGeezy, you can look that up on Facebook too, but Tasha Martineau of Gitchigumi Scouts here she went and got funding and bought land that is right next to where they're starting to build the pipeline. And she's starting a camp there in opposition of line 3. And I just would like to encourage anybody who wants to support the efforts to stop line 3 to go to the Camp McGeezy page, because they do have needs to get that camp up and going. Even just now, today, they're still, getting harassed by the law enforcement when it is her own land now. She's actually on her land, but they're still being harassed by law enforcement. So there is a lot of problems that, these frontline warriors need help with. And if you are able to get out there and support them, get out there and support them. I can't personally risk arrest because of my mom. I'm my mom's caretaker. But for those warriors that are out there doing that work, I give you my entire whole heart and respect, because that is a beautiful thing to be protecting our land and our people like that. And there's a lot of people that don't realize that, trafficking and pipelines go hand in hand. There's all of these out of state workers that are infiltrating our cities and our reservations, even now in the middle of a global pandemic. So if you can support those frontline warriors, please do. And even just pray for them, pray for them, pray for survivors. This is a heavy month for all survivors, whether or not, they're speaking out or not. Even if they haven't, spoken out about it, it's a heavy month for all survivors. So, just keep us all in your prayers. We do we do really appreciate the support that we get from everybody, you know, all of these uplifting comments. There's a couple questions now. There is a lot of anti-trafficking prevention curriculums out there. What is your opinion on them? Are there ones that you recommend, which also address Indigenous survivors of trafficking? Does SBI have prevention curriculum?
I'll answer the question about SBI and then I'll let my sisters jump in. We don't have an anti-trafficking curriculum, but what we do have is an organizing toolkit on missing and murdered Indigenous people, and that includes intersections with trafficking. That toolkit is like over 200 pages of goodness with sections written by ladies on the Survivors Council, MMIW families, attorneys, policymakers, you name it. And it's free for download on our website, sovereign-bodies.org. And the idea is not to tell people how to do the work, but to give them the tools to figure out what work works best for their community. So there's activity guides, worksheets, short little essays with advice from organizers and survivors and family members. So I would definitely recommend checking out that toolkit as kind of a place to start. If there's anybody listening in who feels like, I want to learn more about this issue, or I really want to get involved, but I don't know where to start, check out the toolkit. It's got chapters on policy, data, boots on the ground, healing for survivors. No matter what your calling is, there's an entry point in the toolkit. So with that, I will turn it over to my sisters to answer the other half of that question.
Yeah, I would just say the toolkit too. I know there's one anti-trafficking prevention curriculum. I think it's called Not a Number. Not a lot of places use. I know Mel Alvar, who I work with, her and I had talked about in a training that we just did last month about, you know, maybe forming something like Not a Number, but more Indigenous or, you know, more culturally based. So that might be something that it's going to happen in the future. But as of right now, I don't know of any that are specifically, you know, culturally based. But yeah, unless somebody else does, I'm not aware of any.
So if I can just comment from a Canadian perspective. So from a Canadian perspective, I know that I personally went out to First Nations communities, 63 of the 64 First Nations communities here in the province of Manitoba, and building a toolkit around that piece, in helping First Nations communities identify and respond to human trafficking within First Nations communities, and how to build supports around the jurisdictions of those communities, and pulling from communities, right, in those supports, and how to help the victim and the survivor and move into those roles. So I can't think like off my head what the document is called, but I can get that for you if you'd like. But overall, when those materials are being created, I think it's important to have survivors lead that prior, before, and after, and also having a support wrapped around for survivors prior, before, and after. Also having ceremony around that, and not only ceremony, but elders engaged in that with youth, to make it balanced.
One more question. Oh, go ahead, Carrie.
I just have something to add about curriculum. So as an elder and a survivor, I've worked with a lot of different nonprofits regarding curriculum. And what I most find the need for in regards to curriculum is for the Indigenous person, survivor, to be brought to the table in this work when we're talking about curriculum. For me, it's more important the engagement of the Indigenous community with the agencies at this point. I've seen that over and over where we're not invited to the table to speak in regards to curriculum, in regards to survivor leadership. And so starting with that first has been important for me as a survivor of standing up with my voice in schools, in other nonprofits, and saying the truth. I want to be heard. I want to be seen, just like all our other issues in our communities and where we live, that we're not seen and we're not heard and we're not invited to the table. So this really is an opportunity that I see developing. And it really started for me, again, I want to give credit to Sovereign Bodies because this was really what was happening for me, such a disregard, even in, and I'm being open and candid here, but honestly, I was doing a lot of volunteer work. And what I was finding is that the Indigenous voice was missing and not respected and not heard. And so I would like to enter that in when we're talking about curriculum, that we would like to be invited into these discussions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carrie. Just one more question I'm seeing here. How can we support SBI?
Great question. Thank you to whoever asked that. So we're a nonprofit, so of course donations are always appreciated. Our donations typically go to the things that we struggle to find funding for from other places, and the big piece of that is the support services to families and survivors. One of the things that I believe really strongly is that trauma doesn't necessarily have an expiration date. And especially if you've experienced something like trafficking, or if you have a loved one who's missing or murdered, even if a case is brought to justice, even if you come to a place of personal healing around it, it never goes away. It's always something that you have to kind of work continuously at healing and coping and managing. And so a case could happen 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and there's still acute needs that come out of that. And so SBI, there's families we'll work with for years. And even if their loved one's case has been closed, we still continue to work with them because they're still deserving of that support and that love. And so donations go a long way in helping us do that, especially during the pandemic when there are so many of our more vulnerable relatives, especially who are struggling to put food on the table or struggling to maintain safe housing. SBI provides rental assistance and grocery assistance to families and survivors. It's been an especially precarious time for our youth who are in the foster care system. Many of them are currently on the streets and not able to go back into placement because of the pandemic. And SBI has been assisting in paying for housing costs to keep our youth off the streets so that they're less likely to have to, engage in survival sex work or be trafficked. So we're doing our best, but donations go a long ways. That said, if you can't afford to donate to SBI, or if you're looking to get involved in a more kind of hands-on way, I think a big piece is sharing the resources that the Survivors Council has put together for this month and really uplifting their voices and the materials that they've created, and as well as the other resources on our website. And then I think, like I said, download that toolkit, check out the resources in it and get involved. There's room for everyone in this work and in this movement. And it's going to take all of us to build healthy, safe communities. So don't be afraid to jump in. And, as you've heard repeatedly on this call, follow the lead of survivors. And if you don't know what that means or what that looks like, watch this video again, read the toolkit. But we need you with us in this work. So please do join.
I think that's it. You don't.
Awesome. Thank you for moderating, Jessica.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alea and Carrie and Jessica for sharing so much of your stories and your brilliance and your leadership and expertise. We're just so grateful to each and every one of you, and thankful to have you on the council and leading SBI. And I'm thankful to call each of you my sister. So thank you.
Thank you, vice versa, sister.
Yes. Thank you for everybody for tuning in.
Yes.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.